would always say, things like, watch out, Barry. Barry, they want your music.
For decades, Barry Gibb has carried the weight of both triumph and tragedy. As the last surviving Bee Gee, he has lived through superstardom, scandal, and the devastating loss of his brothers. Behind the polished smile and iconic falsetto lies a story riddled with rumors. Whispers that followed him from the height of disco to the solitude of old age. Now, at 79, Barry Gibb has finally broken his silence. What truth has he revealed? And why did he wait until now to speak? The answer is both heartbreaking and shocking, shaking the legacy of one of music's greatest dynasties, Barry Allen Crompton. Gibb was born in 1946 on the Isle of Man, a small, wind-swept place far from the glittering lights of stardom. The son of a bandleader father and a mother with dreams bigger than circumstance, Barry grew up steeped in music. Alongside his brothers, Maurice, Robin, and later Andy, he developed a sound that would eventually change the world. But long before the fame, there was survival. The Gibb family was not wealthy. They moved often, chasing opportunities that seemed always just out of reach. By the time Barry was a teenager, the family had relocated to Manchester, and then, in search of a better life, emigrated to Australia. It was there, under the hot Queensland sun, that the Bee Gees began to take form. The brothers were inseparable, singing, harmonizing, dreaming of escape from the poverty that defined their childhood. Barry, with his piercing voice and natural leadership, emerged as the anchor. He wasn't just the eldest, he was the one who held the fragile trio together. Even then, he was different from his brothers. While Robin was introspective and Maurice playful, Barry carried an intensity that made him both magnetic and secretive. He kept his feelings close, even from those who loved him most. Their rise was meteoric. By the late 1960s, the Bee Gees had conquered the charts with soulful ballads like Massachusetts and To Love Somebody. They were hailed as the heirs to the Beatles, a crown that weighed heavily on their young shoulders. But success came with whispers. Whispers of rivalries within the group, of Barry's dominance causing friction, of secrets behind the glossy harmonies. As the years passed, tragedy thinned the ranks. Andy, the youngest, died in 1988 at just 30 years old. Maurice passed in 2003, Robin in 2012. Each death chipped away at Barry's soul, leaving him haunted by survivor's guilt. By his late 70s, he stood alone, the last Gibb standing. And with that solitude came reflection. For years, rumors had followed him about the true nature of his relationships, about betrayals within the band, about industry secrets that had never been spoken aloud. For decades, Barry had smiled, denied, deflected. But now, nearing 80, with nothing left to prove and no brothers left to protect, he chose to finally reveal the truth. But before that revelation could come, the world had to understand the storm he had lived through. From the moment the Bee Gees became international sensations, rumors clung to them like a shadow. Some were harmless, fan gossip about their personal lives, speculation about the meaning of their songs, but others were darker, persistent, and far more damaging. And at the center of nearly all of them was Barry Gibb. One of the most enduring whispers surrounded Barry's control over the group. He was the eldest, the frontman, the face of the Bee Gees. Critics claimed he dominated his brothers, stifling Robin's voice, dismissing Maurice's contributions, and overshadowing Andy's short-lived solo career. Fans wondered, was the Bee Gees' magic truly a brotherly collaboration, or was it Barry's empire disguised as harmony? Then there were the personal rumors. Stories circulated of affairs, of tensions in his marriage, of relationships strained by fame. Some claimed Barry had secrets that, if revealed, could shatter the wholesome image of the band. In the 1970s, during the fever pitch of the disco era, whispers about excess, sex, Drugs, betrayals, swirled constantly. Barry denied them, but the rumors refused to fade. And there were industry secrets too. The Bee Gees' meteoric resurgence in the late 1970s, fueled by Saturday Night Fever, seemed almost too perfect. Whispers emerged of backroom deals, of the band being used as pawns by powerful record executives who squeezed them for hits while exploiting their fame. Some even suggested Barry struck compromises that haunted him for years, choices made to protect the Bee Gees' throne at the cost of their integrity. Through it all, Barry kept his composure. He smiled in interviews, brushed aside the gossip, and focused on the music. But behind closed doors, he was tormented. He knew some of the whispers were true. Others weren't. But he feared that denying them too forcefully might expose the very things he wanted hidden. The rumors became a second career, one Barry never asked for but could never escape. Even as late as the 2000s, long after the Bee Gees' heyday, journalists would press him about those old scandals. For years, Barry dodged. He told himself it was to protect his family, to protect his brother's memories, to keep the focus on the music. But as the decades passed, silence became a burden. And by '79, Barry Gibb had had enough of carrying secrets that weren't solely his to bear. The whispers in the shadows were about to be dragged into the light. If the 1960s were the Bee Gees' introduction to fame, the 1970s were their coronation. Saturday Night Fever exploded onto the cultural landscape in 1977, and with it, the Bee Gees became gods of disco. Songs like Stayin' Alive, Night Fever, and How Deep Is Your Love defined not just a soundtrack, but an era. The falsetto harmonies, the shimmering suits, the infectious rhythms. The Bee Gees weren't just a band. They were a phenomenon. At the center of it all stood Barry. With his flowing hair, piercing eyes, and commanding stage presence, he embodied the glamour of disco. His falsetto became the band's signature, a sound so unique it could slice through any radio static. The Bee Gees were everywhere, on the charts, in the clubs, in the hearts of millions. But behind the glittering facade, darkness brewed. Fame on this scale wasn't a blessing, it was a curse. The band became prisoners of their own success. The record label demanded more hits. The tours grew relentless, and the pressure to maintain their image was suffocating. Barry, already the de facto leader, bore the brunt of it. Every failure, every misstep, every scandal, he carried on his shoulders. And scandals there were. The disco lifestyle was drenched in excess, and the Bee Gees were no exception. Drugs circulated freely, temptation lurked at every corner, and the brothers weren't immune. Barry, though always more cautious than some rock stars of the era, wasn't untouched. Nights blurred into mornings, and the line between performance and survival grew thinner. Even worse were the fractures within the family. Robin, often feeling overshadowed, clashed with Barry repeatedly. Maurice, the peacemaker, struggled to keep the balance. Andy, the youngest, was drawn into the whirlwind of fame before he was ready. The public saw perfect harmonies. Behind the curtain, it was often dissonance. The rumors fed on these tensions. Stories of Barry's dominance, of Robin's resentment, of Andy's struggles with drugs and depression began to circulate. And while fans danced to the Bee Gees' music in glittering clubs, Barry privately wrestled with the knowledge that his family was cracking under the weight of the very success they had dreamed of. The Bee Gees' rise was dazzling, but like Icarus flying too close to the sun, it came with a price. And Barry, more than anyone, knew that their fall was inevitable. From the outside, the Bee Gees appeared to be the very definition of unity. Three brothers singing in harmony so seamless, it felt like destiny. Their voices blended like strands of the same DNA, which, of course, they were. Yet behind that flawless sound was a constant storm of conflict, jealousy, and bruised egos. Barry, as the eldest, naturally assumed the role of leader. He wrote most of the songs, decided the musical direction, and handled much of the press. His commanding falsetto became the Bee Gees' sonic fingerprint. To fans, Barry was the face of the group. To his brothers, that dominance often cut too deep. Robin, in particular, bristled under Barry's shadow. Gifted with a haunting vibrato that once defined their early hits, Robin felt sidelined when Barry pushed the falsetto-driven disco sound. Tensions boiled over during recording sessions. Robin wanted space for his own songs, his own voice. Barry, focused on commercial success, often dismissed those demands. More than once, Robin stormed out of the studio, vowing to leave the band. Maurice, the middle brother, played peacemaker. Easygoing, charming, and endlessly creative, he often smoothed things over, coaxing Robin back and tempering Barry's control. Yet even Maurice felt overlooked. His bass lines, keyboard work, and arrangements were essential to the Bee Gees' sound. But he rarely received the same recognition. He hid his frustrations behind a smile, but the imbalance ate away at him. Andy, the youngest and not officially part of the trio, was another story altogether. Pushed into a solo career while still a teenager, he lived perpetually in the shadow of his brother's colossal fame. His struggles with substance abuse were well known, but behind them was a deeper pain. The sense that he could never measure up to Barry, Robin, and Maurice. The press fed on these tensions. Stories of Robin versus Barry became tabloid fodder, framing the brothers as rivals rather than collaborators. Barry often brushed it off, saying, "Families fight. Ours just happened to fight in public." But in truth, the battles left scars. On stage, the Bee Gees projected perfection. Off stage, there were slammed doors, silent car rides, and words spoken in anger that could never be taken back. The very closeness that made their harmonies so unique also made their conflicts explosive. For Barry, the role of leader was both a blessing and a curse. He carried the responsibility of guiding the Bee Gees through fame's treacherous waters. But in doing so, he often alienated the very brothers he was trying to protect. The harmony that the world adored was built on dissonance that the world would never fully understand. And as time went on, those fractures would prove impossible to mend. The Bee Gees' ascent to superstardom came with a price tag far greater than platinum records or sold-out arenas. Fame brought excess, temptation, and constant scrutiny. And for the Gibb brothers, it nearly consumed them. At the height of disco mania, the brothers were living in a whirlwind. Money flowed in torrents. Their music dominated radio, and Hollywood courted them. They became symbols of glamour, their faces plastered across magazines, their songs blaring from every club. Yet with that visibility came relentless pressure, and escape was found in dangerous places. Maurice battled alcoholism, a struggle that began quietly but soon spiraled. His charm and humor masked the pain, but those close to him knew he was drinking heavily just to cope. Robin, introspective and sensitive, struggled with pills, numbing himself against the weight of fame and the constant clashes with Barry. Andy, pushed too quickly into the spotlight, fell hardest. Cocaine became his constant companion, a demon that ultimately claimed his life. Barry, though not untouched, carried himself differently. He experimented, certainly, but he was more cautious. His addiction wasn't to drugs or alcohol, it was to control. He became obsessed with maintaining the Bee Gees' dominance, working tirelessly, often manically, to outright, outproduce, outshine the competition. In doing so, he alienated his brothers and pushed himself to the brink of exhaustion. Then came the backlash. By the end of the 1970s, disco collapsed under its own weight. Radio stations staged disco demolition events. And suddenly, the Bee Gees went from kings to pariahs. The public that had once adored them now mocked them. Barry, who had driven their disco sound, became the lightning rod for ridicule. The fall was brutal. Tours shrank, album sales plummeted, and the brothers were left reeling. Each coped in different ways, some with substances, others with silence. The scandals, whispered in tabloids and hinted at in interviews, painted a picture of a family unraveling. Rumors of affairs, of financial mismanagement, of feuds so bitter they nearly turned violent, clung to them. For Barry, the heartbreak was twofold. He not only had to watch his band's empire crumble, but he also saw his family disintegrating under the pressure. He tried to hold them together, but the tighter he gripped, the more they slipped away. And just when it seemed they might find balance again, tragedy struck in ways that would haunt Barry for the rest of his life. If fame was difficult, loss was unbearable. Barry Gibb's life is marked not only by extraordinary success, but also by devastating tragedy. Losses that stripped away the very foundation of his world. The first was Andy. The baby of the Gibb family, Andy was charismatic, gifted, and unprepared for fame's brutality. His solo career soared briefly with hits like "I Just Want to Be Your Everything," but the pressures of living up to his brothers weighed heavily. Andy turned to cocaine, his youthful charm masking a deep despair. In 1988, at just 30 years old, Andy died of myocarditis, a heart condition worsened by years of drug abuse. For Barry, the loss was shattering. He had always felt protective of Andy, often guiding him like a father figure. To lose him so young was a wound that never healed. 15 years later, another blow came. Maurice, the glue of the Bee Gees, the one who laughed the loudest and fought the least, died suddenly in 2003 due to complications from a twisted intestine. His death was not only a personal devastation, but also the symbolic end of the Bee Gees as the world knew them. Barry admitted he could not imagine singing without Maurice's harmonies beside him. And then, in 2012, Robin passed after a long battle with cancer. Robin had always been Barry's rival and confidant, the brother who challenged him the most, but also understood him the best. Their relationship had been strained at times, but the love between them was undeniable. Watching Robin fade was, in Barry's words, like losing half of himself. By the time Robin died, Barry stood alone, the last surviving Gibb brother. The survivor's guilt was crushing. Why him? Why was he the one left to carry the memories, the burdens, the legacy? He admitted to falling into deep depression, retreating from music, even questioning whether he wanted to live. But Barry also understood something else. With his brothers gone, he became the sole keeper of their story. And with that role came responsibility. The rumors, the scandals, the secrets. They were now his alone to confirm or deny. And as he approached his late 70s, Barry realized he could no longer remain silent. The world deserved to know the truth, even if it shattered the myths that had surrounded the Bee Gees for decades. The Bee Gees were more than a band. They were a phenomenon. By the late 1970s, they had reached a level of fame that seemed untouchable. But what fans didn't see, and what Barry Gibb only now feels free to confess, is the machine that stood behind their success. A machine powered by greed, manipulation, and secrets that nearly crushed the brothers entirely. From the very beginning of their superstardom, Barry realized the cost of fame wasn't just long hours in the studio or endless tours, it was autonomy. Contracts with record labels weren't written for artists. They were written for the corporations. The Bee Gees sold millions of records, yet Barry admits that when the royalties were divided, the money that actually reached them often felt like scraps. The industry executives pocketed the lion's share. Barry later revealed that some years they were forced to tour relentlessly, not just to satisfy fans, but because their financial situation was far more precarious than the public ever realized. One of the greatest industry manipulations involved the creation of Saturday Night Fever. While the film was originally a low-budget project, the soundtrack exploded into a cultural juggernaut. But behind the scenes, Barry and his brothers were pushed to exhaustion. Executives demanded song after song with little regard for the toll it took. Barry once recalled nights where he barely slept, working until dawn in the studio because he knew if he slowed down, someone else would take their spot. "We were like soldiers in a war," he later said. "Only our battlefield was the studio, and our enemy was failure." Another dirty secret was image control. The Bee Gees were pigeonholed into disco, and once the sound hit, the industry refused to let them evolve. Robin wanted to return to ballads. Maurice wanted more experimentation. But the labels were clear: falsetto, disco, hits. Barry, under immense pressure, became the one to bend. He leaned into the falsetto style, even as it strained his voice and alienated his brothers. At the time, Barry justified it. After all, the sound was selling records by the millions. But now, decades later, he admits it felt like a trap. It stopped being about music and became about survival, he confesses. Perhaps the darkest revelations involve the culture of excess, encouraged by the very people meant to protect them. Drugs weren't just tolerated, they were facilitated. Executives turned a blind eye, sometimes even providing substances to keep artists awake, compliant, and producing. Barry remembers the haze of recording sessions where cocaine was as present as microphones. "It was the culture," he says quietly. "If you didn't play along, you weren't part of the game." Watching his brothers spiral into addiction while executives looked away, or worse, enabled it, left scars that never healed. For years, Barry remained silent, fearing the consequences of speaking out. But at 79, with the weight of survivors' guilt pressing down, he no longer shields the truth. The Bee Gees were not just icons, they were pawns in a system that exploited them, profited off them, and then discarded them when the disco backlash arrived. The public saw glamour. Barry remembers exploitation. And as he reveals these secrets now, one thing becomes clear. The Bee Gees' survival wasn't just against cultural tides. It was against the very industry that claimed to support them. Imagine standing on a stage built for 3 voices, 3 personalities, 3 brothers, and finding yourself the only one left. For Barry Gibb, this is not imagination. It is his reality. At 79, he is the sole surviving Gibb, carrying not just the music, but the memory and the weight of everything they endured together. When Robin passed in 2012, Barry admitted publicly that he felt crushed. His relationship with Robin had been complicated, riddled with rivalry, disagreements, and moments of estrangement. Yet, beneath it all, there was a love only brothers could understand. Watching Robin slip away to cancer felt like losing not just a sibling, but his mirror, his challenger, the one person who truly understood the battles he fought within the band. Barry later revealed that after Robin's death, he often sat in silence for hours, replaying old recordings of their harmonies, trying to feel whole again. Maurice's loss in 2003 was different, but equally devastating. Maurice had always been the glue, the peacemaker, the one who could diffuse Barry and Robin's conflicts with humor. Barry called him the unsung hero of the Bee Gees, the quiet genius who never demanded the spotlight but made everything work. His sudden death from complications of a twisted intestine left Barry stunned. "It didn't feel real," he admitted. "One day he was laughing, the next he was gone." And then there was Andy, the baby of the family. Barry had always felt more like a father figure than a brother to Andy, trying to protect him from the harsh realities of fame. But Andy's demons were too powerful. His death at 30 left Barry racked with guilt, wondering if he could have done more. "That one broke me," Barry confessed. "I couldn't save him, and I'll never stop asking myself why." The survivor's guilt grew heavier with each passing year. Barry has described it as a haunting presence, a voice that whispers, "Why you? Why not them?" Fans saw him as lucky to be alive. Barry saw himself as cursed to carry their ghosts. Every performance now feels like a seance. When he steps on stage and sings classics like Words or To Love Somebody, he doesn't just sing, he communes. "They're with me," he told one interviewer. "Every note I sing, I feel them beside me." But the presence is bittersweet. It's comfort laced with pain. The burden isn't just emotional, it's historical. As the last surviving Bee Gee, Barry is the final custodian of their story. Journalists press him for answers. Fans beg him to confirm or deny rumors. And historians treat him like a living archive. For decades, Barry resisted. He feared tarnishing their legacy. But now, with age comes perspective. He realizes silence erases truth, and telling the full story, even the scandalous parts, is the only way to honor his brothers properly. Being the last survivor isn't just about loneliness, it's about responsibility. And Barry Gibb has finally accepted that responsibility, no matter how heavy it feels. For more than half a century, Barry Gibb lived in a world of whispers. Rumors of rivalries, scandals, and betrayals swirled around him, but he rarely addressed them. He smiled, deflected, and buried the truth beneath a polished public image. But now, at 79, Barry has chosen to break his silence. The first revelation was about control. For years, critics accused Barry of dominating the Bee Gees, of silencing Robin's creative input, of overshadowing Maurice. For decades, he denied it. Now, he admits there's some truth to it. "I was obsessed with keeping us at the top," he said candidly. "And yes, that meant I sometimes didn't listen when I should have." He revealed that Robin often felt stifled, and that Maurice sometimes hid his frustrations to avoid conflict. "I thought I was protecting us," Barry said. "But I see now I was also pushing them away." He also addressed the rumors of industry coercion. The falsetto that became iconic? It wasn't a bold artistic choice. It was survival. The label wanted more of it. The fans wanted more. "I gave them what they wanted, but it came at a cost," Barry confessed. The cost was his brother's resentment, the narrowing of their creative range, and the strain on his own voice. What the world adored was, in Barry's words, a compromise that caged us. Then came the personal confessions. He acknowledged the strain fame placed on his marriage to Linda, though he insists their bond ultimately saved him. He admitted that temptation was constant, that there were moments of weakness, and that the rumors of infidelity weren't entirely baseless. Yet what struck listeners was not scandal, but humility. Barry didn't defend himself with excuses. He confessed with sorrow. Perhaps the most haunting confession was his survivor's guilt. "I think about Andy every day," he said. "I wonder if I should have dragged him out of that lifestyle, if I should have done more to save him." With Maurice, it was so sudden I never had the chance to say goodbye properly. And with Robin, I just wish I'd been more patient. His voice cracked when he added, "I carry them with me, always. That's my punishment for being the one left." Barry's silence breaking wasn't about sensationalism. It wasn't designed to sell records or grab headlines. It was about truth. Truth that had been buried under decades of myth. Fans expected scandal. What they got was confession. And in many ways, it was more powerful than the rumors themselves. At 79, Barry Gibb finally told the world, the Bee Gees weren't perfect. They were human. And perhaps that truth makes their music even more enduring. When Barry Gibb finally confirmed the rumors, the world leaned in. Not because people wanted to see a legend fall, but because they wanted to understand the human story behind the myth. His confession reframed not just the Bee Gees' legacy, but the history of modern music itself. For decades, the Bee Gees were seen as icons of disco, a glittering, falsetto-driven force that defined the 1970s. Their ballads of the 60s and their reinvention in the 80s and 90s were often overshadowed by the towering success of Saturday Night Fever. But Barry's confession pulls back the curtain. These weren't untouchable gods. They were brothers who fought, compromised, and sacrificed themselves to stay relevant in an industry that would have discarded them in a heartbeat. The confirmation of rumors about exploitation, about Barry's dominance, about the cost of fame doesn't diminish their legacy. It enhances it. Fans now listen to "Stayin' Alive" and hear not just a disco anthem, but a cry of survival. They hear "How Deep Is Your Love," not just as a ballad, but as a plea from men struggling to hold their lives together. The music takes on new layers when the truth is known. For historians, Barry's honesty adds dimension to the Bee Gees' narrative. They weren't merely trend chasers who rode the disco wave. They were pressured, manipulated, and boxed in by an industry that thrived on exploitation. Their choices weren't always artistic. Sometimes they were desperate. Understanding that makes their achievements even more remarkable. For Barry personally, the confession represents freedom. For decades, he carried the weight of secrets, the pressure to protect his brothers' reputations, the fear of tarnishing their image. At 79, with the truth finally spoken, he no longer hides. "I can breathe now," he said. "It's all out there. No more shadows." The impact of Barry's words ripples outward. Younger artists see the warning. Fame is not a gift without cost. Fans see the humanity. Behind every glossy album cover lies struggle. And the world sees Barry for what he truly is. Not just the last Gibb, but the truth-teller of a family saga that has no equal. The Bee Gees' music will always endure. But now, thanks to Barry's confession, it will be remembered not just as a soundtrack to an era, but as the testimony of men who lived, loved, fought, and lost more than most could ever imagine. And in the end, Barry's voice carries not just the melody, but the truth. Barry Gibb's confession at 79 strips away the glitter and leaves only truth, raw, painful, and unforgettable. The Bee Gees' story is no longer just about music, but about survival, sacrifice, and love. What do you think? Does truth strengthen or weaken their legacy? Subscribe, share, and join the conversation.